Hey, hey, hey. Happy Memorial Day, y'all. I think are we supposed to say Happy Memorial Day? That seems oxymoronic in a little way. I don't know. Anyway, it's Move the Ball Monday. I'm so glad you're here. I typically don't go live on Mondays, but Friday night or Friday early evening, I had an accident um, driving along. In fact, I was in a passenger seat of a car and fallen asleep actually because I'd had a couple of spirits and was awakened violently by a crash. And it turned out that the other driver had been not paying attention, distracted, whatever, and had barreled through a stoplight. If you happen to follow me on Facebook as a social media platform, you can see the video in the post that I made about it yesterday. But what is beautiful about it is like almost anything that ever happens to me is that I always have an opportunity to learn something. And I had nothing to do because my breastplate hurt so bad, and so does my shoulder. Um, I don't think it's hurt. I don't know. I go to the doctor tomorrow, but where the seat belt kind of holds you in, all of those spots are just in incredible pain. But the good thing about that is that I had nothing but time to sit around and relax and think. I also had an opportunity to be tagged again in a comment or post about how empathy isn't the way. And I think it's important to recognize that um, part of why I was actually able to rest this time is because in 2011, my mother was murdered in a car accident where someone ran a stoplight, and my anxiety was so high that my blood pressure would not come down. So I was in the emergency room for like 6 hours. And this particular time, um, even though intellectually I felt like I was cool, I know that my body keeps the score. And so somatically, my blood pressure was high because clearly my body was telling me something that my mind didn't want to accept. And that was that I needed to sit down. But in sitting down, I got tagged in a post that basically said empathy is not the answer here. We need to have an offline conversation about how shaming a person is the answer. And that was in response to a question that I had. This person was saying, "Hey, can you tell me the best suggestions for how to shame a person who um, I can't remember the term they used, but apparently the person was very egotistical and also sounds like was wrong." And my question was really simple. My question was, do you think that shame is going to get you the result you want? And they responded back and said, this is not about empathy. This is about accountability. This is about, um, this is not about being nice. This is not about being kind. There's no time for that right now. And it just reminds me of who I was when I first used the term empathy in a more professional context to say this is absolutely what is missing in our world. I remember it vividly. I was teaching a class about how to help difference get along, how to make sure that people felt included, and how to be fair with folks. And I was talking to some of the richest citizens of Kansas City. And at the end, this guy said to me, he's like, "Nicole, I get everything you're saying intellectually. I was hoping you were going to help me get it emotionally." He was telling me that he didn't care, that the way his life was set up, he was completely indifferent to whether or not people felt like they were included or whether or not systems were fair because they just didn't impact him. And I understood that. And I went out on this mission to try to find somebody to talk more about empathy. I went to churches, I went to nonprofits, I went to the caring places, schools. I'm like, the person who makes decisions clearly based on logic and reason is not the one to talk about empathy and compassion. Like it shouldn't be me, right? Like the way I make decisions is not necessarily by stepping into a situation and wondering what I would want to happen if it were me. That's just not my natural way. Now I've been doing this now for years. And so it has become a skill, but it's not my natural way. My natural way is to step out of a situation and say, what would I want to happen if I were being objective, if I were being reasonable, if I weren't so close to it? But the danger, or the place where I was wrong in taking that approach, is that I conflated caring about someone and empathy. While I do still believe that the opposite of empathy is indifference in some ways, reading the book Sociopath by Dr. Patrick has helped me to understand that the data that says the most empathetic people around us, the people with the highest levels of empathy, happen to be therapists. And that makes sense, right? Like, you go to your therapist's office, they understand what you think, feel, and believe so that they can help you process your emotions, think about what patterns you have, work through these things, give you strategies that they know will work. When I think about my existing therapist, this guy almost never starts with cognitive things. He wants me to get out of my head. He's not talking to me about mental exercises and why stuff works. Most of the time, he asks me to close my eyes. And in doing so, generally, I will start to cry. But that release of emotion is actually me getting in tune with my body so that we can have an intellectual conversation. But he knows that about me. That's why he doesn't start there. Too many times in therapy, it's been just like a private place for me to banter back and forth with somebody I like. But therapists, number one. Number two, hostage negotiators. Oh my God. You got these people who need the hostages to be released. That's what they need. When they show up, this is a high stakes situation. The goal is release the hostages. Everyone knows that that's the goal. And yet they have to get into the mind of the person who has taken the hostage so that they can say and do the things necessary to get the person to release the hostages. That's how the process works. The better able a hostage negotiator is a detective, especially in these high stakes, like massive serial killer situations. If you ever have watched Criminal Minds, most of the time what they're trying to do is to imagine if they were the person who was committing the crime. That's empathy. The third group that has the most empathy is said to be sociopaths. People who don't feel emotion. Dr. Patrick describes her experiences like, she's like, I've not felt love. I've not felt incredible anger. It's almost like I know what those emotions are, she says. It's like standing outside an amusement park and watching the ride. Of course, your heart rate goes up when people are at the top. Of course, you get anxious when it's about to go over. Of course, you kind of sense some exhilaration, but you are watching it from afar, not in it, not part of it. And she says that's the difference between how most people feel and how sociopaths feel. She's a storied therapist herself who works specifically with people who are sociopaths. But here's the challenge that I run into. Everyday people, really nice people, balk against empathy because they're like, if I'm empathetic, then that means I'm not being kind. And if I might go back to this example, which taught me a lot, because I had an opportunity to sit and I didn't have anything else to do but to sit with, why do we keep having this, or why do I keep having this misunderstanding with people? One is the way I kind of set it up, that it was the caring that helps me to find my way to empathy. But the truth of the matter is, and the reason why I did a TED Talk on this topic, that the teaching me about empathy has been happening my entire life. I grew up directly across the street from a pimp. The profession of a pimp requires you to understand people so well. You have to understand what kind of person you can get to do this kind of work, that you have to understand how to talk to them, what motivates them versus what scares them. You have to know who does not have family close enough to them to be able to save and protect them. You have to understand the Johns. You have to understand the police. If you're going to do this job for any length of time, you have to be exceptional at stepping into the mind of another person and understanding what they think, feel, and believe to get them to do what you want. We've called that manipulation. And manipulation has a very negative connotation to it. But the truth of the matter is, the reason why I'm here with you talking about this right now is because I am trying to influence your behavior. My intention is good, but ultimately, I'm trying to get you to do what I want. And I don't like to think of myself as a manipulator. But what is the difference between manipulation and influence? What is the difference between manipulation and motivating? Besides intent, the outcome is I have said something or done something to influence how you act, which takes me to a point that just kind of hanging around in bed has helped me to think about. When I wrote this book, I wrote about the 5 different types of empathy, and emotional or affective empathy is what people think of most of the time when they're saying, I can't be empathetic. It's not what's called for in this moment. And they're saying, I don't want to feel what you feel. This moment does not call for me to feel what you feel. I get overwhelmed when I feel what you feel. If I feel what you feel, that means I must agree with you. If I feel what you feel, I must think that somehow I don't have to hold you accountable. If I feel what you feel, then somehow that also means that I am not being courageous. I am not speaking up, right? And here's what I'll say is that actually, if I understand the feeling you have, so let's imagine I am going to try to shame somebody. And I think about myself and I go, oh my gosh, I am a people pleaser. I want people to like me. I don't want to be ashamed. Shame would work. But when I think about some of the people I know, shame ain't going to work. And so if shame is not going to work, empathy is helpful to you because you can differentiate when shame will work and when shame will not work. You see, I think there's a misunderstanding that I'm saying when I asked my question that I was suggesting that shame was not the method to choose. In general, I do think that shaming a person is not a learning tactic. In general, I do think that ashamed adults are not learning adults. But there have been times when I have been shamed and it has changed my behavior. And if in this particular situation, shame was the most effective strategy, by all means, use it. By all means, if you think that it is going to change that person's behavior, keep someone else from engaging in maladaptive behavior, do it. But the type of empathy that's the easiest to teach and what most of the book is wrapped around is cognitive empathy or mental empathy. It is, I might not feel what you feel. I might not, when I see you crying, I might not be sad, but I understand that you are sad. And because I understand that you are sad, I will then decide how I want to act based on the fact that you feel sad. Now, here's what that means. When you have someone who you think is egotistical, get into the mind of the person and go, if I were egotistical, what would cause me to shift? What would get my attention? And so I'm just curious to know, and part of the reason why I'm here on a Move the Ball Monday is because this is like, I've been thinking about this since probably Saturday. I've been truly, Saturday, I felt like I'd been hit by a bus. We ran into a truck, but I felt like I'd been hit by a bus. That dang seatbelt, they are trying to convince me that the seatbelt is why I feel this way. It seems like, okay, does the seatbelt have a hard, like a fist? Like, it feels like somebody's punched me in the chest. But it has prevented me from doing a lot of movement. And when I can't do a lot of movement, I'm just kind of sitting with my thoughts. And sitting with my thoughts, I'm just like, oh, given that people think empathy means nice, and given that people think empathy means kind, given that people think empathy means compassion, agreement, lack of accountability, what is the best way? Because I do believe empathy is kind of a linchpin for us to help shift a bunch of levers to change what's going on in our society. If I understand you, that you are committed to ignorance, not that you are ignorant, that you are committed to ignorance, meaning you do not want to learn, does it make sense for me to give you more information? You see, empathy would say that more information is not the answer when somebody is committed to ignorance. When someone is hateful, And it's not intellectual capacity or horsepower. Do you keep giving a hateful person information? Or do you think about those times when you have been hateful and what would move you? Like, how do you get into that person's psyche to understand what would move them? That's empathy. And quite frankly, while people call it a soft skill, it's actually a dangerous skill. It's a very dangerous skill to have, actually. I mean, think about this. You have the ability to get into someone's head, not feel with them, and still recognize what might motivate them and move them. I would argue that every PR campaign is based on the concept of empathy. You don't have to agree with me to convince me to buy things I don't need. You don't have to agree with me to sell me food that will poison me. You don't have to agree with me to get me to spend money I don't have, to argue with people who are not my enemy. Like, if you think about what has happened in terms of how the narrative has been shifted, and they've got us talking about, they've got people who've can't have kids, ain't been able to have kids for decades, talking about reproductive rights, arguing about it. Don't impact them at all. You got folks who don't know one trans person, never seen a trans person as far as they know, arguing about bathrooms. You've got folks who benefit from both migrant workers, immigrants, documented and undocumented, but don't realize it. And so they're tapping in. We're having folks tap into this thing that we do to be decisive. The strategy has always been distract, divide, destroy. But if you don't know that, then you don't realize that's what's being used against you is empathy. That empathy is being used against you to manipulate your behaviors. And so what I have been sitting with is, at the end of this book, I put together 14 different things that people could do to build their empathy muscle, 14 exercises. And what's fascinating about it is I know people are not going to do 14 things. So why did I put that in there? It was like a lack of empathy, even in how I designed this book. What I should have done instead was say, look, here's a bucket of things. Don't number them, and say, pick the one that resonates with you the most. And I want you to practice doing this thing. Like, practice reading the room, practice trying to figure out what another person feels or thinks just by watching their body language, practice listening for understanding, use your active listening muscles to repeat back to people, right? And so when you think about what it might look like, I'm going to do the empathy 14 differently this year. Instead of 14 days of us doing all 14 of the items, I think I'm going to give the list of the 14 and say, pick one thing that you're willing to do and just practice doing that same thing over and over and over and over and over again for 14 days. Because let me tell you, some of the world's most influential people, and when you think influential, don't think positive here necessarily. You see, because empathy on the surface is very neutral. It is not positive or negative. Intent is what makes it positive or negative. We assume when people are empathetic that they have positive motivations. But how many of you have ever had someone smile at you, ask about you, listen to you, create space for you, only to later take you for everything you had, either mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially? Because as much as we don't want to admit it, that person has very high levels of cognitive or mental empathy. That's how they were able to get you to drop your guards down. And so what's happening is those of us with nefarious intentions use empathy against folks, right? But those of us who are well-meaning, have the best hearts, are like, I just don't understand. and don't spend the time trying to get into the mind of the other person. Those of us with good intentions have a decent moral compass, and I don't even get to tell you what that is. You get to decide what that is. We're the ones who are like, nah, now ain't the time for empathy. I want you to change your words, and this is all I got left for you here. I want you to change it to, nah, this ain't the time for me to try to understand what they're doing so I can manipulate this situation in my favor. It's a long sentence, but it is what empathy is. This ain't that we need to have a sideline conversation, because this ain't the time for me to understand them so well that I can manipulate them into doing what I want. But preachers do it, pimps do it, politicians do it. I'm telling you, us, especially those of you who have high levels of emotional empathy already. I'm not saying it's bad to have high levels of emotional empathy. You probably experience a decent amount of burnout related to it too, though. But cognitive, mental empathy, you have an unlimited capacity to demonstrate it. And if we understood people better, if we listened more, if we created psychologically safe spaces, which also does not mean kind. It means I make space to say, for you to say exactly what you think, feel, and believe. So I know what I'm working with. I say what I think, feel, and believe so that you know what you're working with. And on this foundation of truth, now we can take the next right action to make progress. I got a long little road ahead of me here, kind of for my little physical restoration. I appreciate each and every prayer. Thank you all so much for praying. But I'm grateful, and as more thoughts come, I'll also share those with you. But I want you to, as you have ideas for me, because this method that I'm trying is not completely working, I don't think. So I'm trying to understand the person who was me before, who believed that empathy meant agreement, who believed that empathy meant kindness, who believed that empathy meant that I was being soft in some way. For me, just understanding the difference was helpful, but that's not working. So whatever suggestions you all have that I can use and share with other people so that we can use empathy as the power skill it is, I want y'all to share it with me, because I'm going to keep talking about empathy because it is the foundation for which most other things exist. It's like when we think about what's happening with guns, when we think about what's happening with religion, when we think about what's happening in schools and healthcare and all of these things, and the way the richest few dozen citizens are getting richer and richer by the second, and everyone else is losing, but we're fighting against each other. Empathy has a critical component to play in us understanding that better so that we can be part of whatever the solution is. It's Move the Ball Monday. We've got work to do.